Hey, it's Ellie Mae with Silhouette Secrets Plus, and I wanted to just share with you real quick as I'm going through a project how I cut multiple colors at the same time. And this is something I do whether I am cutting any material. So if I am cutting cardstock, I started with cardstock, that's where I first started doing this, but I'll do it with vinyl and HTV as well if the project fits. So if I can, I will combine as many colors onto a design mat so I can send it through the Silhouette cutting machine one time. And how I do that is this works if you are using a Silhouette cutting mat and you load your mat properly. The grid lines on your virtual cutting mat line up with the Silhouette cutting mat grid exactly. And it's very, very close as long as you load your mat correctly and your housing is in alignment. I will throw up some links in the description below in case your cuts are off, but basically it's just counting your grids. Each of these grids on your screen is 1 inch. And the way I revealed my grid on my screen is on the page setup panel, which is in the top right corner. I slid the transparency slider, and in older versions of the software, it's called Reveal. What it does is it reveals your cutting mat grid. So usually I design with my cutting mat revealed at 100% because I like to be able to position things and know exactly where they're going to cut. This takes practice, but once you get the hang of it, you're still going to make mistakes. I still make mistakes and I measure wrong, but it can save you time in the long run and get your projects all cut on one mat that you send through the Silhouette machine all at one time. So I'm just going to show you how I did this. So I have this design. Here's a finished photo of the project. So you can see the full design put together. But what I have, this is a mess of Christmas lights, and all of these little bulbs are light bulbs. So what I'm going to do is I am going to send this through. If I were to send each of these pieces through with the way that they're set up, you would use a lot of excess vinyl in here. So what I'm going to do is these could be cut on scraps or pieces that are small and cut down. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to place my big sheet of black here in the left corner, and I will show you photos of this or on the screen. We'll go into cutting it down and placing it on the cutting mat here in just a minute. But I want to show you this. So here are my dark blue bulbs. In this file, I need to right click and release compound path. Ungroup is not an option, but there really isn't a compound path in this particular light bulb design. It's just a simple shape. But I'm going to release compound path, and then I have now their individual pieces. So I can move these down. And you really want to give yourself some, be patient with yourself as you're learning this. Give yourself some space. So, and I don't usually go smaller than a 2x2 square, especially if my mat is not sticky, because I find that that will move. But if you have a super sticky mat, which I do at the moment, a 2-inch by 2-inch square is perfectly okay to work with. The more you do this, the more comfortable you're going to get with it. So I'm just going to start, and I'm going to give myself some space here. You do want space enough to be able to cut these apart because I'm going to be adding them to my design individually. It sounds like a lot of work, but I found that that just works the best for me, and it saves a whole lot of vinyl compared to, cutting this. Let's see, if I measure this currently as it is, it would need a 3.5-inch piece by at least a 5-inch piece of vinyl. However, if I move it over here and I right click, release compound path, and just move my light bulbs, and I will put up a link to the full tutorial that I'm doing on assembling this as well, so you can see that. It's in the description below. But I now have all of that, those light bulbs, into a 2x2 square. So I'm going to continue to do the same thing for all of my colors here. Release compound path. And it does take a little bit of work just to set it up, but then I can send one mat through my Silhouette to cut at a time, and I'm not sending it, let's see, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different times. So we'll just get these moved over. Make sure to leave space in between so you can cut them apart easily when you're using them. And release compound path. And then I'm just going to move these over here. So now I have all of these, and I could group them together after I wanted to. You can move them apart. This one's going to be placed in the top right 2x2 square. You just want to make sure that you're placing, and I can group those together. This one will be up in the top left corner. Again, give yourself some space. Practice, 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 practice. I've been doing this for several years in this manner. So, and like I said, I still make mistakes. Measure twice, cut once. So now what I have is I have my colors set up in different sections of my cutting mat. Now I can cut my materials down to this size, and then I can place those on my Silhouette cutting mat exactly where it shows on screen. And if the mat is loaded properly and your housing is in alignment, it will cut in that same exact area. So it's a great way to be able to save some time and cut everything all at once. So now I'm going to switch over to the camera and I'm going to show you how I do this. Okay, so I have all my different colors of vinyl, and I'm going to reference back to my Silhouette software on the sizes I need, but I'm going to show you my supplies first. So I have a paper trimmer. Any paper trimmer that gives you a straight edge is going to work. I prefer to use the paper trimmer because I like straight edges, and I have all the different colors gathered for my vinyl. You can see here I just pulled in my scraps. This is Oracal 651, and I pulled in all my scraps that I could use and cut down. There was a couple colors that I didn't have the scraps the size I needed for. So I'm going to then pop back in, and I want to reference. I know that all of my colors except black are 2x2 squares. So I'm just going to come over here and again, give yourself some extra space. So if I count these squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I'm actually going to cut this 7.5 inches. And here, if I can, I use my ruler up here too. I'm going to cut it 7.5 by 7.5 just to give myself a little extra space. But if I was doing it just for my normal project, not on camera, I would probably go down even as close to 7.25 inches just to save the space, or see how close I could get it to this 7 inch by 7 inch. But I do like to give myself, I mean, I'm not using too much excess space here, and it gives me just a little bit of wiggle room. So I'm going to switch back over the camera. So this square here is 7.5 by 7.5. I'm going to place it in the bottom left corner of my cutting mat. And then each of these colors, I'm going to need a 2 inch by 2 inch square. So let's switch back over. And then I'm just going to get to cutting. So I am going to speed this up. But again, my black is a 7.5 by 7.5. So I'm just going to grab that black and use my paper trimmer and trim that down. So I will speed this up and you'll see me doing all the cutting. Okay, now I have all of my pieces. So I have all my 2-inch squares for my lights, and I have my big black piece. I can set my paper trimmer aside. The paper trimmer is a very handy tool to have in your studio. And then I have my cutting mat here. So I'm going to try and zoom back just a little bit here so we can see this. But I'm going to take the blue protective cover off of my cutting mat, and I still keep that on my surface. I'll use it after the cut. And then I'm going to line up the colors exactly as it showed on my screen. So if you remember, black was over here in the bottom left-hand corner. So I'll line up my 7.5-inch piece over here. And then I am going to take a quick look back. So we'll pop back over. And I have yellow and light blue. And then I have green, red, and blue. So we'll go back to the camera here. And I kind of laid those out while I was saying that on the screen. So I have yellow in the top left corner. And you can see I have the numbers on my Silhouette cutting mat. My grid, the bold grid of the cutting mat is 1-inch marks. And you want to make sure to get that lined up. Mine was a bit off. And then you want to make sure, I know blue is in the very bottom corner. So I have that down here. And then you'll notice I had it set at 2 different areas here. I want to go back and I want to double check. So I'm going to go back over to my Silhouette software. And my green started at the 3-inch mark. So 1, 2, 3-inch mark, or you can use your ruler on the side. So I want to make sure to put my green starting at the 3-inch mark. And then I want to make sure to put my red starting at the 6-inch mark right here on the screen. So I'll come back over here. So that was at 3 and that was at 6. And I will move my camera up. And I'm going to count my squares. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put my green here. And the more you do this, the better you'll get at it. You can also use the numbers on the side. So I have 6 over here. If I move my finger over, here's my 6-inch mark. I can count those squares again if I wanted to. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my red starts here. So when you're done, your entire cutting mat should look and match exactly what you have on your screen. So if we look here, I have all of my colors lined up on the screen. And then I'm able to send this through all in one cut. So I'll switch back over here, and I'm going to go ahead and load my cutting mat. And you want to make sure that you load your cutting mat with the line on the edge. The left edge of the cutting mat is next to the line on the left side of the machine. So you do not want your cutting mat over top of it. You want the left edge of the cutting mat next to the line on the left. Then this is how the machine knows exactly where your designs are, or exactly where in relation to the cutting mat, physical cutting mat versus the virtual cutting mat. If you're using another brand of cutting mat, which I don't recommend, but if you are, it's not going to match up the same. There are other cutting mats have different margins on the edges, and it can make a difference in where the placement is. So if you plan to do this, I would highly recommend you using a Silhouette cutting mat. So I'm going to go ahead and load this. And then I am ready to cut. So I'm going to come back over. I'm going to set it up to cut, and you always want to make sure to do test cuts before you get going with your project. I'm going to choose the setting that I have created. This has been working very well for me. So I am going to go ahead and click on send, and I'll switch back over here. And it's going to cut each of those colors out. And now you have your entire design all cut on one silhouette cutting mat. So you are ready to go to start weeding and assembling your design. Check out the link in the description below for the tutorial on how I use this in a project. Here is a photo of the finished project. I hope these tips help you to be more successful with your silhouette cutting machine. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.